It's always a special day on the Athletic Football Show when we get to the NFC North preview. About 5 years ago now, Derek, which is crazy to think about. The NFC North preview was the first ever show on the Athletic Football Show feed. And so this feels like a little bit of a birthday every year that we do this. Today is my birthday when you guys are going to be listening to this. So me and the Athletic Football Show celebrating the same birthday today.
Which Bears season was that? So was that going into 2019?
That was going into 2020.
Into 2020. Okay.
Yeah. So I believe that was the Andy Dalton year.
Yeah. Okay. I was trying to piece together like which particular despair you were in at the moment.
Oh, excuse me. No, that was not the Andy Dalton year. That was the Nick Foles year.
Oh, even worse. Okay,
Yes.
So you were in like the most quarterback despair for.
I was going to say which
Bears
years, just what sort of pain you prefer. Like you don't really have to differentiate that much.
Yeah, it was a fun conversation, just like arguing against a wall that Nick Foles wasn't actually going to save the Bears. But don't worry, we'll get to plenty of like Bears existential quarterback dread over the course of this show. But it's good to be back. It always feels like we're starting and celebrating another year when we get to the NFC North preview. So let's dig into this. The Detroit Lions. For each of these teams, are going through their offseason in 60 seconds. Coaching changes for the Lions. Lost Ben Johnson to the Bears as their head coach, formerly their offensive coordinator. Aaron Glenn, their defensive coordinator, to the Jets. Hired John Morton as their OC. Fought off some outside interest for Hank Fraley, who was their offensive line coach and now their run game coordinator. Promoted Kelvin Shepard to be their defensive coordinator. Extended Kirby Joseph, 4 years, $86 million. Signed DJ Reed, the cornerback, 3 years, $48 million. Brought back Derek Barnes, the linebacker, 3 years, $24 million. Small deals for Roy Lopez and Tim Patrick. In the draft, took Tyleek Williams, defensive tackle, 28th overall. Guard Tate Ratledge in the second round. Wide receiver Isaac Tesla in the third round. Gave up two 2026 third rounders to move up for Tesla. Lost Carlton Davis, Kevin Zeitler, and Ife Melifonwu in free agency. Just a quick heads up, if you're watching this on YouTube, we'd love if you liked, subscribed, let us know your thoughts below, anything we missed, who you think is going to win the NFC North. We would really, really appreciate that. We're doing YouTube previews for every single individual team. So if you're watching the Lions preview right now and you want to go check out all the other NFC North teams, they should be available for you very shortly. For each team, Derek, we're talking about what we are excited to watch with this team in 2025. Hit me with what you are excited to see for the 2025 Detroit Lions.
I feel like for a number of different teams, we've done this might be the best defense in the league. We've done it like, we talked about it over different shows, the Broncos, the Seahawks, Texans, all teams like that. Man, if the Lions defense is healthy, they might be the best in the league. Like Aiden Hutchinson was a defensive player of the year until he got hurt. And I think there was a little bit of a dip after that happened where we were like, oh man, are they going to be able to put the defense together? Because him and a million other players kept getting hurt. And by the end of the year, despite 8 million injuries, they were still one of the best defenses in the league. And I know they're changing out the defensive coordinator and we'll talk about that. But like from a talent perspective, they have dudes at every single level. And young players, I think we might expect jumps from, like Terrion Arnold might get better. Jack Campbell, I think, has started to look a little bit better. Like this is just, it's a defense that has a lot of the right guys and it has enough stars to be like a holy type of unit.
The secondary is where that really jumps out to me, Dave, just because you lose Carlton Davis in free agency. And, the thought might be, okay, maybe Ennis Rakestraw steps in as a starter. You took him in the second round last year. He's hurt now, but even before the injury, they go out and they just blow it out of the water by going to get DJ Reed. It's like, no succession plans here. Like we're making sure that we are talent-wise just as good as we were during the 2024 season. We are not messing around with what we need this group to be. And so I think that was a real declaration of intent, them going out and getting DJ Reed in the way that they did.
Which draft and develop is a great way to build a team. I think in a vacuum, it's probably the best way to build a team if you can count on all of your draft decisions to work out. But this is a perfect example of why that's not always a good idea and why it can be a good idea to cover yourself in free agency. It sucks. I feel bad for Ennis Rakestraw, but he's not going to have a 2025 season. And think about how much you would be scrambling right now if that had been your plan. If you were like, we drafted these guys for a reason, they're going to step up and kick. I think Lions fans would be in a bit of a panic if that's what they had done. And instead, you go get a similar player to Carlton Davis and DJ Reed for a lesser price tag. I loved the move when it happened, and it looks even better right now because we're still excited about this secondary. So I think that's worth keeping in mind. Like, I think most people you shun major free agent moves, you shun giving veterans a lot of money, and we want to get excited about our draft picks, but you can do this thing multiple ways.
And like the last point I really want to make about the talent on defense, especially if you're inserting a new defensive coordinator. Probably the two nicest things that guy could have is a pass rusher I know can win no matter what we do, which obviously Aiden Hutchinson I think has become, and like one guy in the back seven where it's like we can build everything around his flexibility and what he can do. And that's Brian Branch. And so the fact that
Yeah.
like the new defensive coordinator is walking in with two of the nicest pieces you can have to build a defense around, it makes me incredibly excited for how everything else should line up for them.
And there are no weak links in the secondary. And I think that was the
No.
case last year when all those guys were healthy, because I think Amik Robertson was kind of a revelation for them playing nickel. We were a little bit worried about Brian Branch moving from that spot more to a full-time safety role. They got Robertson for next to nothing in free agency, and he was really good for them. I mean, especially late in the year, and then he gets banged up, which the amount of just tragedy that's stacked up over the course of the year for this Lions defense was ridiculous. But this is a group that top to bottom on the back end is really good. And for the amount of man they've historically wanted to play, you need that sort of group back there. My answer to this and what I'm excited to watch is kind of an extension of that, but it extends to the offense as well. There's just so much talent on this team. Like, there's so many good players on the Lions, and we'll talk about where this could go wrong and where they might take a step back and all of that stuff. Coordinator changes, there's plenty to dig into, and there's plenty of critical thought to apply to the Lions. But on a very simple level, it's kind of like good players go burr. Like, that's how I look at the Lions roster, and that's how I feel about this. It's like, along with Aiden Hutchinson, along with Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph, Jameer Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, Lee McNeil when he's healthy, and even a lot of really, really solid supporting players. So getting to watch this team at full strength without the defense being absolutely decimated, getting to watch Aiden Hutchinson for a full season in combination with all the other young talent, that's what I'm excited to watch with this team. We'll see what happens on the margins and the coaching and all of those other aspects to it, but just the pure amount of talent on the field with your 22 starters every single week, this team is in the conversation with anybody else for the high-end players that we're looking at.
I think we always want to make a lot about like the margins because that's our job, right? It's to, oh, what are the little differences that coaching is going to make or all the little stat regressions and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like the Eagles last year or even the year before, where it's like, even if a lot of going wrong, if you are so talented, you can still get into the playoffs almost regardless of everything else. And the Lions do feel like that kind of roster.
It's a great comparison because I think that's the argument for how this could go well. Even as you're changing out coordinators, if you have just an overwhelming amount of talent, can the rest of that stuff matter less? And I think the Eagles have shown that. Obviously, what happened with the Eagles, they needed to get the right coordinators in there eventually, but you still have a certain floor when you have that level of talent across the entire roster. And I think the Lions, the Eagles are probably the best like analogous case for what you could expect from them if things go well.
I think that's an interesting point, and I'm thinking through this in real time. But we focus so much on what the Lions have lost and what they don't have, and I know we're moving past the idea that this is a fun, feel-good story. We're judging the Lions on a different level than what we were doing in 2022, 2023, 2024. But an organization like Philly is a perfect example. They've built three different Super Bowl teams across multiple different eras, across multiple different coaching staffs. This is the Lions moving into that territory where it's like,
Yep.
okay, maintain it. And I don't want to offend any Lions fans, but maybe because of my life experience, there's some part of my brain that thinks this is all going to disappear in a wisp of smoke, But they have so much talent. There's every reason to believe that that's not going to be true.
We'll revisit this when we talk about what success is for the Lions, because I think that there are some tangible 2025 wins and losses elements of that. And I think there's some bigger picture organizational strength and quality questions to that. For each of these teams, we're talking about the swing points that they're going to face this season. Where could the year pivot for the Detroit Lions? Derek, why don't you hit me with yours?
I think to me, it's the offensive line. And it's for two reasons. One, they're inserting a bunch of new guys that are replacing a lot of veterans. Obviously, Frank Ragnow is gone at center. Kevin Zeitler, who was only there for a year but played pretty admirably for them last year and is another veteran guy. So those two guys are out of the building, and they're trying to put now Christian Mahogany into the lineup as a full-time guy. Graham Glasgow, who was kind of their their fifth offensive lineman last year, he was kind of just like a serviceable guy. Now he's taking over at center. And then you have Tate Ratledge, the rookie at right guard. That's just a lot of new. It's a lot of shakeup. It's a lot of young for a unit that over the past like 3 years has been at least one of the top 5 offensive lines in football. And so this to me is just for as much as like we get excited about what the Lions passing game and stuff has been, a lot of it is driven through like what they can do under center by running the ball and setting up play action, good downs and distances, being in 3rd and 9 and being able to run the ball to get into 4th and 2 and go for it, that type of stuff. I just like if this young interior is not what they want it to be, that could be an issue, but they've invested enough, at least in guys like Tate Ratledge, that like you can see what the upside could look like.
There's no doubt that there's upside, and I think that they
Mhm.
deserve the benefit of the doubt here. There are certain teams
Right.
based on the development plans we've seen along the offensive line and their ability to still function when we've had guys hurt over the last couple years. That's what really sticks out to me. It's like the 1 or 2 Christian Mahogany games that we saw last year, you barely noticed that he was in there, unless it was in a good way, because he was playing well enough for you to notice him. I think they've been able to really ride the wave with injuries in such an impressive way. And I think that's why I do have a lot of faith that this can work. But Dave, even if you get to a point where you feel good about Mahogany, Rowledge is solid for a rookie, Glasgow gives you a certain floor as your center, we're still probably talking about an offensive line that's like on the fringes of the top 10 rather than one that's definitively in the top 3 or 4. And I think that's probably the best case scenario. So what that gap means for the overall quality of the Lions offense, I think that's a question that is still worth asking.
And I guess it's a compliment to the Lions roster that this is the thing that I said I was losing sleep over. When
Yeah.
we had our
Mhm.
call and we're talking about how we feel about things, the interior specifically, 'cause I'm not worried about the tackles, but the interior of the offensive line in Detroit, when you talk about potentially downgrading from near the top of the league to even, yeah, even if they're like top 10, moving down from where they were, in my opinion, I think that could be a really, really big deal. And I know Graham Glasgow is still there, you're still talking about 3 new positions because Glasgow's moving back to center full time. You got Mahogany and Ratledge stepping in at guard. Like the entire interior of your line is new. And if Frank Ragnow was still playing center, I wouldn't bat an eyelash at this. I think it full disclosure, Frank Ragnow is like one of my favorite players of the last 5 or 6 years. He's so good and he was so tough too. I think I fell in love with him around the time he broke his throat and like didn't miss a substantial amount of playtime. Like that's a thing that happened. And I went back and watched just to refresh myself. And I'm like, yeah, this dude never gets moved. He can handle his guy one on one almost all the time. He cuts the defense in half. Like anytime you watch Gibbs or Montgomery spring something, Ragnow was almost always in the middle of it, getting to the second level, just eliminating somebody from the play. And then you go back, I went and watched Glasgow played center for Ragnow against Seattle, I believe, last year. Was not bad at all. Like he did a perfectly acceptable job. Obviously, the Lions won that game. But you can just tell a difference from a Frank Ragnow to a Graham Glasgow, where it's like, yeah, like he's kind of hanging on for dear life here. He's getting some help from the guard here. He's just not the center that can step out and do everything on his own. Because Frank Ragnow has been one of the best 3 guys in the NFL for most of his career. I think that makes a huge difference, A, in what you're getting from that position, but also having somebody to lift up 2 new guards. So it's not that I think they're going to be bad, but I think they were elite or close to it. And if they're not that, I do think it could make a pretty significant difference.
It's a difference between your floor and your ceiling. And I think that when you
Mhm.
put Graham Glasgow at center, I think in their minds internally, even no matter what we think, it was about setting a certain floor at the position. We know what we're going to get here. Tate Ratledge played guard in college, and you're making sure that the bottom doesn't fall out of it. But you're probably not going to see those high end outcomes that we saw when Frank Ragnow was there, and that's okay. And I will say this I'm with you in that obviously there are more questions about the interior guys than the tackles, but Taylor Decker's 32. He's coming off of an injury this offseason. Like, it's at least worth monitoring what his trajectory looks like from here on out. I mean, if we see a slight step back in his play, and now you're getting worse at 3 to 4 of these positions with really only Penei Sewell, locking down that right tackle spot in the same way we've seen in years past, I think that's when this stuff starts to compound a little bit and you start to feel some of the effects. So, Dave, what was your swing point for the Lions if the offensive line is what was kind of keeping you up at night?
I think the main thing is how good exactly does Aiden Hutchinson look? And I don't have a lot of doubts about that. I guess I always just want to see it when a guy is coming off of injury. I mean, if anybody needs a refresher, he was going to win Defensive Player of the Year last year. Like, I don't have a problem saying that. He had 8 sacks and 45 pressures. He got hurt right around halftime of game 5. Like, he didn't even make it 5 full games. He had 8 sacks and 45 pressures for a team that won 15 games, by the way. There's no doubt in my mind he wins Defensive Player of the Year if he has a healthier season. An unscientific list of guys I came up with last year that Aiden Hutchinson finished with as many or more sacks. 4.5 games, mind you. George Karlaftis, Josh Sweat, Rashawn Gary, Max Crosby, Chop Robinson, Nolan Smith, Khalil Mack, Jared Verse, Montez Sweat. He had the production of some of those guys in a third of the season. He was incredible. He's an incredible player. I think he'll be fine, but is he going to be that? You know, and that's, if he is, then I think Derrek's point is right that this could be one of the best defenses in the NFL. But I want to see that, and I don't need him to get to 8 sacks in the first month of the season. That's kind of crazy, but I need him to look like a guy that you can sort of build the rest of a pass rush around.
For quick context, and this is before a couple injuries had happened, and so they probably were not involved in the numbers here. FTN and DVOA has the Lions as the number 1 defense in the NFL as they're doing their preseason projections. So that's good to keep in mind as we think about what the reasonable expectations for this team might be. This team is in such a good spot that I don't think there are that many great answers to this question. But Derrik, what is keeping you up at night about the 2025 Detroit Lions? A question we're asking about all of these teams.
I mean, that's kind of the thing. Like, nothing. I think there are some like a bunch of questions with the team. Like, how good are the coordinators going to be? Which, again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. How good is the interior really going to be? The front outside of Aiden Hutchinson is maybe not elite, so how good are they going to be? But there's really no part of this roster where I look at it and go, man, I am certain that's going to be a problem for them. And I think that's just a testament to the way that they built this thing. And maybe it's even a testament to, like, maybe if I scrapped the helmet and took away the head coach, some of this stuff would be more of a concern. But there's some degree of, like, institutional faith that I kind of have in Dan Campbell that pushes some stuff that maybe would be a keep me up at night to, like, it's a swing point. Maybe this can be fine. So I really just don't have, like, a glaring, flashing red light for this team.
I didn't either. I think there are some questions about personnel. We've hit on those. We'll talk about the coordinators and what might feel a little bit different and whether or not these units can stay elite on both sides of the ball. If I had to pick one, and I think this is maybe a little bit alarmist, but it's kind of where my brain goes, it's keeping me up at night that this team might have already peaked offensively and not made the most of whatever that 2-year stretch looked like. Obviously, last year they couldn't, right? I think that's what makes. I'm thinking about what Dan Campbell said after the Niners game against the Niners in the NFC Championship game.
Man.
Just this idea that it's really, really hard to get here and you don't know if you're ever going to be back. And then they come into last year and you could reasonably make a case that they were the best team in the NFC for most of the season when healthy and maybe the best team in the league. And then you just completely run out of gas because you have no defensive players by the end while still having an offense that is just this well-oiled machine. And I do think they'll be good on offense, talking about the amount of talent that they're bringing on that side of the ball. But there are just so many little things about who they were over the last couple of years, especially last year, that's just going to be hard to replicate. They were extremely healthy on that side of the ball for the most part. They led the NFL in success rate. And this is my favorite one. And this is why it's going to be hard to recapture this, even if John Morton is good. The Lions last season, according to True Media, produced 107 EPA on throws of -5 to 5 air yards. So just behind the line of scrimmage to 0 to 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. 107. No other team in the league had more than 60.
Who's even next? Like the Bucks?
It's
Something
Chiefs.
like that? Okay, that also
The Chiefs were at
that
60.
tracks too.
Here's the craziest part of this. Overall, the league had 75 EPA because of all the teams that were
because
in the
all the
negatives.
teams that sucked at it.
So the Lions produced 140% of the total EPA on -5 to 5 yard air yard throws last year. The average was 2.3. So on those plays, the Lions were like 50 times more valuable than any other offense in the league. Even if John Morton does a good job, you are not doing this again. It's just not happening. And so those tiny little margins of going from being just this hyper efficient, dominant 30 points a game offense to being merely very good, the seventh best offense in the league. You can still be a good team when you're doing that, but is your best possible shot already gone as you lose some of those little details? And that's very nitpicky, but that is what's keeping me up at night and would be if I were a Lions fan. Just this idea of, did we already miss our best chance because of what sort of well-oiled machine we were over the last couple of years?
It might be nitpicky, but that's the type of stuff that playing the games gives you clarity on, though. And like, to bring it back to my point, you can give me 8 reasons why the guys on the interior of the offensive line might be fine. And maybe they will be, but if the Lions don't hit the highs that we saw last year and you look back on it in January, you're like, ah, man, they did miss Frank Ragnow and it had this ripple effect and they just weren't quite as good as what we got used to seeing. I think that is a very real thing, and that is the fear of attrition. Like, that's why we talk about it so much.
Let's talk about what we're watching in the first month of the season, some stuff we want answers on. Derek, why don't you kick us off here?
I think we could say like the offense in general, but for me, it's a little bit more specific about like what does Jared Goff look like in the new offense? Because I think at both stops that he's been very good at, they've been very particular offenses. Obviously, he was put in even more of a box in LA with the Rams, and I think both he and Sean McVay have admitted a lot to that. And it was more open with Detroit. It was a lot more of like finding what is he good at, giving him more control at the line, all of that stuff. But it was still very much a like, we're under center, we're throwing over the middle of the field off play action. We're not asking you to throw down the field because you don't do that. And it was a lot of like, we're finding really what he's good at. I don't know what the new Detroit offense is going to look like, and I'm curious to see what it now looks like, where I think when he was going from LA to Detroit, I had no idea what he could mentally handle, really. And now I think I have a clearer picture. He is better as a drop back passer. He is better pre-snap handling protections and stuff. And so in a new offense, what does all that stuff look like? I'm really interested to see.
My assumption is this will look a lot like it has over the last couple years with like subtle changes.
Mhm.
Maybe we'll see a slightly more expansive drop back menu because that's where John Morton comes from. Like, he is a drop back pass guy. If you look at the play action rates on some of the teams that he has coached on, like we talked about this, Derek, in the Quarterbacks at a Crossroads show, like those Raiders teams when John Gruden was there was not a lot of play action. It's an extensive drop back sort of menu. That is like the true blue West Coast world that he comes from. They're not going to throw the play action stuff into the garbage. Like, they're still going to use a lot of it because that's what they've been good at. But you just see the history and the preferences of the coordinator kind of manifest in these subtle ways when you get to the end of the season. It's like, oh, this was a little bit different. They didn't quite as much of this. And you see that with the actual play calling. I do think that it's been a collaborative process there over the last couple of years. And I talked to people about this when I was at training camp. We'll still have that. There's still guys like Scotty Montgomery, Hank Fraley, those people that were on the staff. Dan Campbell, this idea that it's Dan Campbell's offense, I think is kind of a little bit silly. Like, Ben Johnson was the coordinator for the
That's
last 2
Lions
years.
fans' cope.
Yeah, that's like Ben Johnson was the coordinator. But I think that the game planning process and that has been collaborative and continued and will be as we move forward. But now you get to game day, and I think it's probably gonna be a little bit more collaborative on game day than it used to be. Ben Johnson was an exceptional play caller. So if you go from exceptional to even very good, you are going to see some sort of downgrade. And then you combine that, Dave, with some of the personnel changes that we're talking about. And this is how you go from one of the best 2 or 3 offenses in the league to the 8th or ninth best offense in the league. And that can make a huge difference when you're trying to achieve things at the highest level.
I think that's fair, but I'll be nice and point out too, I don't think Dan Campbell would hire John Morton or Kelvin Shepard to just do an impression of Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. Like, I think Dan Campbell is a smart enough, good enough coach to have a bigger picture and more mature mindset here than just trying to recapture what worked for them with the guys who are no longer there. And that's what I'm interested to watch, is like, one way or another, the Lions are going to look different. Like, the way that they do things, the way that they handle certain situations. I mean, they're still going to be the Lions, right? I'm not saying, like you said, they're not going to throw out their playbook or the way that they like to be aggressive and some of the hallmarks of the Dan Campbell era. But I think Dan Campbell is smarter than to just try to fake his way through losing his coordinators. So it could be different. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be good, I guess.
I think the offense will look very similar with a couple specific wrinkles, especially in the drop back game and what they're trying to accomplish, like on third down, stuff like that. The defense, and that's what I'm watching the first month of the season. How different does the defense look under Kelvin Shepard? The process of picking the coordinators, I think with John Morton, it was one of those things of, okay, these are like the 4 or 5 guys that we're choosing between. John has these sorts of strengths. He has a defined history with Dan Campbell. He was there in 2020 when they really kind of poured the offense out onto the table and rebuilt it in the first full year under Ben Johnson. So he was a part of that process, and he knows the guys. You know, him and Jared Goff have a prior relationship. There's a certain level of comfort there. But I still think, again, he was the guy they chose out of whoever the candidates might have been. Kelvin Shepard is somebody that they've been tabbing for this for years. Like, it was a couple of years ago when Dan Campbell was, talking to Aaron Glenn, like, if you're going to move on as a head coach, like, this is the type of guy that we should get ready. And I do think we might see a slightly bigger departure on that side of the ball schematically than the one that we see on offense. If you look at Kelvin Shepard's background, the two people who I think really have influenced the way that he thinks about defensive football are Steve Spagnuolo, who he spent 2 years with when he was with the Giants in 2016 and 2017, and Lou Anarumo. When Lou was the interim defensive coordinator for the Dolphins, Kelvin was on that team. And so what Lou Anarumo and Steve Spagnuolo do, Derek, is very different than what Aaron Glenn was doing last year, right? Like, this is a team on third down last season that played man 60.2% of the time. And they were very, very good at it. The idea that you could lead the NFL in defensive success rate when playing man 60% of the time, playing man coverage on third down, is crazy. Typically, a lot of those other teams that are up there in that stat are the ones that don't do it very often. So it's like a weird changeup and teams aren't ready for it. The idea that the Lions could major in it and still be dominant doing it is really, really hard. But I do think, to your point, Dave, they're thinking about, okay, we pulled that off. That's hard to do again. These man heavy teams, that's where you actually see a lot of volatility in defensive success from year to year. And so trying to figure out what the wrinkle is on top of that, I think you'll see some of that. And I think you'll see them tap into the continuity on defense as a way to really enhance that. So now that we've had all these guys play together, especially in the back seven for multiple years, Campbell, Anzalone, the players that we talked about in the secondary, with Reed being the only new piece, but he's been in the league forever. Can we be a little bit more flexible? Can we have certain checks to make sure we're getting in the right stuff? Can we use a little bit more disguise? So I do think it will be more complex, Derek. The question is whether that's a good thing. This reminds me a little bit of the Ravens last year, where Zach Orr, I think, learned the hard way early in that season. We have a lot of continuity, have a lot of these same pieces back, and I think they got too complex, and it hurt them in year one under new coordinator, even though that guy was on the staff and they carried over a lot of the defensive talent. So even if there are more layers to it, do the layers benefit them, or are guys playing a tick slow because you're overloading them a little bit mentally? I think watching that over the first month to 6 weeks, that push and pull, is what I'm going to be really curious about when it comes to the Lions.
Yeah, they're going to be one of those defenses that we might talk about them differently in October than we do by December for all of those reasons. And that's exactly what the Ravens were. The Ravens were not a good defense for like 8 weeks, and then we're like the third best defense in the league for all of the reasons that you're saying. And that took a couple of personnel changes and stuff like that, moving Kyle Hamilton again for that to work. But, and, we'll see what that might be with the Lions. But I do think like the thing I want to hone in on that you've kind of talked about is like Aaron Glenn ran, I think, more of a specific defense than people realize. Like, I think when we talk about those defensive coordinators, we're thinking of like the Steve Spagnuolo, the Brian Flores, like, oh my God, look at all this crazy doing. But Aaron Glenn ran like more base defense than anyone in the league had any right to, and he played more man coverage than anyone had any right to. It's just that it was taught so well, and everyone's like, the run fits were good when they were in all this base stuff, that they were getting value out of the things that they were doing. Almost no matter what Kelvin Shepard does, it's going to look a lot different than that. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see what that's going to look like for them.
The one personnel thing before we wrap this up on defense that I am watching out for is what the front looks like, because that is the area of concern to me. Yet losing Live Onwuzurike before the season even started, and now you're really chipping into your interior depth specifically, because Onwuzurike is out for the season. We'll see what happens and when we get Aleem McNeil back. So right now, you're really relying on Tyleik Williams, DJ Reader, and Roy Lopez, who all have pretty similar skill sets. Like, you watch Tyleik Williams even in the preseason, he's a big man who's going to play on the other side of the line of scrimmage. How much pass rush juice are you getting from that group collectively, to me, is a fair question. And then you could extend that to the edge. Like, right now, Marcus Davenport is still the number 2 edge rusher on this team. Josh Pascal is hurt right now, so their depth there is a little bit affected. It still feels like, and Kelton Pouncey has written this for The Athletic and covers that team extremely well, is there an outside addition among the front, especially on the edge before the season even starts, Zadarius Smith, somebody like that, because they're thin at these spots. So personnel-wise on the roster, outside of the interior, I would say even including the interior of the offensive line, this is the area I'm most worried about because at least they have a plan on the interior of the offensive line. The plan for this is still a little bit more worrisome to me. Let's get to what success looks like, David, for the 2025 Detroit Lions.
I led this off by saying maybe I worry a little bit about the Lions more than I would another team because I've never seen them navigate these waters before. So for me, that would be success for the Detroit Lions is navigate the attrition, prove that you are attrition proof, handle losing 2 coordinators and losing some key veterans and still be a good team, still make the playoffs, still win the division. I mean, the Lions have the talent. I think 15 wins is unrealistic. I think the biggest Lions fan would agree with that. But this team could still win 12 games and win the NFC North. I don't think that's unrealistic at all. So prove it. Prove that you can keep this thing humming and that you are really that type of organization that is going to be in the mix no matter what you're dealing with.
I think that's right. I think it's the wins and losses, but it's also just what this season says about the organizational health overall. If they win 11 games, make the playoffs, and show us that they're one of those teams, the ones that are just around every single year, even as they change out the component parts, I think that would be success for this team. And, they've been so good over the last couple seasons that it's easy to treat them as kind of a mainstay now in the way that we think about them and talk about them. But it's only been 2 years that they've been in the playoffs. Like, this is not that long of a period of time when you compare it to the other like truly excellent organizations in the league. And so show us that you are one of those teams, and that matters on the field and how many wins and losses we see, but it's also just how we think about them and the staying power that this regime specifically has. And I believe that can happen, but I think that would be the marker of success this year.
And I do too, because that's the thing that makes all of those teams is that they just replace their coordinators really well. Like, there's a lot of things the Ravens have done really well over the past few years, hitting on Lamar Jackson, good drafting, all that. But they also, like, every coordinator hire they make is really, really good. And so I think Dan Campbell is going to have to prove that. And again, I have faith in it, but until we see, you just don't know.
It's a perfect example because the Ravens are a team with a CEO head coach who does not call the plays. So them hitting the right coordinators is a necessary part of their success. Some of these other teams have not had as much luck when it comes to finding the next coordinator and being able to bridge that gap. And we're going to find out, most likely by the end of this year, where the Lions fall between those two sets of teams. Thanks for watching The Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.